Hey DCC, and welcome to another edition of Morning Coffee. I don't know about you during this break, but I spent a lot of time with my family, and I'm not a big movie goer, right? Like, I don't go to the movies that often. In fact, I think I've gone to one show in a movie theater, in the last 12 months until this Christmas break. And then my daughters came back from college, and we all wanted to go as a family. And so I actually saw like two in 3 days. And so that was abnormal for me. But one of the shows that we went to see was called The Greatest Showman. It was this story. It's a musical. It's got Zac Efron. It's got Hugh Jackman. I think Zendaya, whatever you call her, and Michelle Williams. I think is one of the characters as well. And so it's this musical, but it's based off the life of P.T. Barnum, from Barnum and Bailey Circus and all those things. But what was interesting to me about this plot, and I'm not going to try to spoil it, so you don't have to like shut it off if you haven't seen the movie, because I shouldn't make any big spoils. But Barnum grows up in these very humble beginnings, right? He has super humble beginnings. He's not rich. He's not wealthy by any stretch, and so his dad is in kind of servitude to this wealthy businessman. And so one of the things that you learn right away is that wealthy people kind of abused and maligned and used P.T. Barnum. And so this is something that makes an impact early in his life. And there's a certain degree to which you can relate to this because he takes this past story, right? This story of being used and abused by a wealthy upper class, and he allows that to fuel him. And in some ways, it's great, right? He takes it and he becomes an overcomer and he becomes a dreamer, and he pushes through a lot of problems that most people wouldn't push through, and he stays optimistic and he gets ingenious and he uses creativity, and he inspires his daughters and his family to dream these big dreams, and his wife to dream these big dreams, and it's just amazing. But on the other hand, when his story begins to overshadow his presence, right? His present moment, and he takes that past and it begins to overshadow, then it starts to jack up his relationship with his wife, which then affects the time that he spends with his kids, which then affects how he treats people, and how much he loves them and cares for them. And he starts to mistreat everyone of his close relationships. The very people who had gotten to where he is, he turns his back on. And he doesn't love them, and he's embarrassed of them. And he has all these moments where he turns his back on his wife and becomes enamored with being accepted into this high society and being accepted into wealth. And there's this whole thing where his past story bleeds over and just consumes him, so that he makes very, very poor choices, and it jacks up his marriage. And that's about all I'm going to do to spoil the plot of that. But I think we can relate to that, right? We can take things that are in our story, that are in our past, and as we discover those things about ourselves, we can start to take them to a very, very bad degree, right? I grew up a pastor's kid, and so I grew up with this kind of interesting relationship that you have with the church, right? And some of you have been pastors' kids or kids in ministry, and you kind of understand it, and some of you haven't. And, for us who grew up pastors' kids and kids that our parents were in ministry, there's a different type of relationship that you have with the church, right? The church isn't just, this place that you go or a community of people that you have fellowship with. It's kind of the place where it's your dad's boss, and they decide how much your dad gets paid. And they have all these rules. And for me, in the church that I grew up in, they had rules and regulations, and they had, ways in which they treated my dad and underpaid him. And so I grew up with this kind of story of having this kind of us versus them mentality with the church. And in a very real way, it was hard for me for many years not to suffer under that story, right? Like, I would view church people, and I always had this kind of pessimistic, negative, jaded view of what church people are like, because they were always kind of trying to, either underpay me or my mom stood in line at the grocery store with her WIC vouchers, right? So that she could get milk and cheese and everything because we lived at or below the poverty line most of our lives. And yet there are lots of people in church who didn't face that. But I didn't take notice that there are also a lot of people in church who did, right? And so there's a part of my story and my past and those things where I allowed that for part of my life to overshadow the great things about church and the great people about church and the people who did love us and take care of us. And so there was a good deal of rebellion, hatred. I didn't like the church. I wasn't a big fan. And maybe you can relate to that. But so for me, I allowed that church hurt and that church wound to make me react a certain way to different people. And it prevented me from loving them, from chasing after their hearts, and from doing things that I should do. And so that affected me when I was in pastoral ministry. If I saw those same types of people in the churches that I served, I had a tendency just to kind of keep them at arm's length and treat them a certain way and react to them in anger and different things like that because I didn't want to tolerate that kind of behavior because I felt like I had been oppressed by it. And so one of the challenges that I want you to have this week is that think about ways that you can take your past and unfortunately allow it to overshadow your present. And it can rain down on you. It can kind of become this way to make you jaded, to make you skeptical, to make you pessimistic, to make you treat other people not the way that they should be treated. And so then it just has this cancerous, acidic way that it can kind of take over your life. And man, we don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen in your life, and I certainly didn't want it to happen in mine. And so one of the things that we had to do is for me, I had to look at my past and understand my story and understand the truth of my story, and then allow Jesus to kind of redeem that and allow Jesus to allow me to move past it and not let it overcome kind of my present. And so this week, think about what parts of your past are kind of bleeding into right now in your present and affecting you, and realize it can be horrid, right? It can affect your marriage, it can affect your relationship with your kids, it affects your relationship with friends and people and coworkers and all kinds of things if we allow it. So let Jesus redeem those parts of your story and have you restored again, okay? Have a good day.